She did everything right, reported the harassment, filed for a restraining order, begged police to take her fears seriously. But on a November night in 2020, her obsessed stalker climbed through her bedroom window and murdered her while her family slept in the next room. This is the story of Celeste Mano, a young woman failed by every system designed to protect her, in a case that would expose the deadly inadequacy of Australia's stalking laws.
Celeste Manno was 23 years old, living with her family in the Melbourne suburb of Mernda, working in customer service and planning her future. She was described by everyone who knew her as kind, vibrant, full of life. She had close relationships with her family, particularly her mother Aggie. She was the kind of young woman who made people smile, who helped co-workers, who had her whole life ahead of her. But in the months before her death, Celeste was living in fear. Fear that began in the most ordinary way possible, at work. Celeste worked at a call center alongside a man named Louis Sacco, who was 35 years old at the time. They were colleagues, nothing more. Celeste had made it clear she wasn't interested in any relationship beyond professional courtesy. But for Louis Sacco, that rejection was unacceptable. What began as unwanted attention at work escalated into obsessive behavior. Sacco began messaging Celeste constantly: texts, social media messages, emails. When she blocked one account, he'd create another. When she blocked his phone number, he'd call from different numbers. The messages ranged from declarations of love to angry accusations that she was ignoring him, to increasingly disturbing statements about what he'd do to be with her. Celeste reported the harassment to her employer. The company's response was to move Sacco to a different shift so they wouldn't work together directly. But this solution addressed workplace comfort, not Celeste's safety. Sacco continued his harassment campaign outside of work hours, knowing where she lived, tracking her movements, showing up places he knew she'd be. She was terrified, Celeste's mother Aggie would later tell reporters. She told me she felt like she was being hunted, that no matter what she did, he found a way to contact her. She changed her number multiple times. She locked down all her social media. She avoided places she used to go. But he was obsessed. He wouldn't stop. In the months before her death, Celeste went to police multiple times. She provided evidence of the harassment, screenshots of hundreds of messages, documentation of his unwanted contact, witness statements from friends who'd seen him following her. She was doing everything victims are told to do when facing stalking behavior. The police response was to suggest she file for an intervention order, Australia's equivalent of a restraining order. They explained that without explicit threats of violence, there was limited action they could take. Harassment and stalking, while frightening, didn't meet the threshold for immediate arrest or detention. In September 2020, Celeste was granted an intervention order against Louis Sacco. The court document explicitly prohibited him from contacting her, approaching her, or coming near her home or workplace. Violation of the order was a criminal offense. On paper, Celeste now had legal protection. In reality, she had a piece of paper that Sacco completely ignored. The harassment continued. Sacco violated the intervention order, repeatedly contacting her through new accounts, driving past her house, showing up at locations where she was present. Each violation was technically a criminal offense, but enforcement was reactive rather than proactive. Police would document the violations, but Sacco remained free. Celeste became increasingly frightened. She told her mother she felt the police weren't taking her seriously, that the intervention order was worthless if it wasn't enforced. She felt abandoned by systems that should have protected her. I could see the fear in her eyes, Aggie recalled. She was sleeping with her door locked. She was checking over her shoulder constantly. This wasn't how she should have been living. She was 23 years old, and she was terrified in her own home because some man decided he couldn't accept that she didn't want him. On the evening of November 15, 2020, Celeste went to bed around 11 p.m. Her family was home, her mother, her father, her brother. She locked her bedroom door, as she did every night. She likely checked her phone one last time, perhaps hoping there would be no new messages from her stalker. She went to sleep in her own bed, in her family home, believing she was safe. Sometime after midnight, Luis Sacco arrived at the Mano family home. He'd been surveilling the house for weeks, learning its layout, identifying vulnerabilities. He knew which room was Celeste's. He knew the window. He climbed onto the roof and accessed Celeste's second-story bedroom window. Whether it was unlocked or he broke it open remains unclear from public records, but he gained entry. He entered her bedroom while she slept. What happened next was brutal. Sacco attacked Celeste in her bed, stabbing her multiple times with a knife he'd brought specifically for that purpose. Celeste screamed. Her family heard and came running. But by the time they broke down her locked bedroom door, Sacco had fled through the window and Celeste was dying from her wounds. Emergency services were called at 4:05 a.m. Paramedics arrived within minutes and desperately tried to save Celeste's life. But her injuries were too severe. Celeste Mano was pronounced dead at the scene, in her own bedroom, in her family home. Despite doing everything she was told to do to protect herself, the manhunt for Luis Sacco began immediately. His identity was known. The intervention order made him the obvious suspect. Police located his vehicle and issued an urgent alert. By dawn, they had tracked him to a relative's home in the suburb of Greenvale. Sacco was arrested without incident at 9:42 a.m., less than 6 hours after the murder. He made no attempt to deny his presence at the scene. His clothing was covered in Celeste's blood. The murder weapon was recovered from his vehicle. His phone contained evidence he'd been planning the attack for weeks. During police interrogation, Sacco showed no remorse. He claimed he loved Celeste, that she should have given him a chance, that if he couldn't have her, no one could. His statements revealed the depth of his obsessive entitlement. He genuinely believed Celeste owed him a relationship, and her rejection justified violence. The case sparked immediate outrage across Australia. Celeste had done everything right. She'd reported the stalking. She'd obtained legal protection. She'd documented violations. She'd begged for help. And she'd still been murdered by the man stalking her. "The system failed my daughter," Aggie Mano told reporters, grief and anger in her voice. She went to police. She got the intervention order. She reported every violation. And they did nothing. They told her there was nothing more they could do until he actually hurt her. Well, he hurt her. He killed her. And now it's too late. The investigation revealed systemic failures at multiple levels. Police had documentation of at least 12 intervention order violations by Sacco. Each time Celeste had reported it. Each time, police had documented it. But no arrest was made, no consequences imposed. No escalation in protective measures taken. In Victoria's legal system at the time, intervention order violations were often treated as minor offenses resulting in fines or warnings, rather than arrest or detention. The burden remained on the victim to continuously report violations, rather than on the system to proactively protect them. Luis Sacco was charged with murder. His defense attempted to argue diminished capacity due to mental health issues, claiming his obsession constituted a psychiatric disorder that reduced his culpability. Psychiatric experts for the prosecution countered that while Sacco had obsessive tendencies, he was fully aware of what he was doing and had planned the murder deliberately. The trial included disturbing evidence of Sacco's preparations. His search history showed he'd researched how to break into homes undetected, how to disable security systems, and how to commit violence efficiently. He'd surveilled the Mano home for weeks. He'd purchased the murder weapon specifically for the attack. This wasn't a crime of passion or impulsive violence. It was premeditated murder. In October 2021, Louis Sacco was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 36 years before parole eligibility. The judge's statement captured the horror of the crime. "You stalked, terrorized, and ultimately murdered a young woman whose only crime was existing and not wanting to be with you. You violated every boundary, ignored legal orders, and ultimately took her life in the most intimate violation possible, entering her bedroom while she slept and killing her in her own bed while her family was mere feet away." But for Celeste's family, no sentence could bring her back. No punishment could undo the trauma of finding her dying in her bedroom. No justice could answer the fundamental question: why wasn't she protected before it was too late? Celeste's case became a catalyst for reform. Her family and advocates used her death to push for changes to stalking laws in Victoria and across Australia. They demanded that intervention order violations be treated as serious offenses with immediate consequences. They called for better training for police in recognizing escalation patterns. They advocated for electronic monitoring of high-risk stalkers and protective custody provisions for victims in extreme danger. Some reforms were enacted. Victoria strengthened its intervention order enforcement, making violations more likely to result in arrest. Police received additional training on stalking behavior patterns and risk assessment. Funding increased for victim support services. Celeste's law, proposed legislation named in her honor, would create a specific stalking offense with enhanced penalties for technology-facilitated stalking. But advocates note that systemic change is slow, and many of the same gaps that cost Celeste her life remain in place. Victims still report feeling abandoned by police who treat stalking as a civil matter rather than a criminal threat. Intervention orders are still violated with minimal immediate consequences. The burden still falls primarily on victims to continuously report and prove they're in danger, rather than on the system to proactively protect them. Detective, Senior Constable Jamie Pickering, who worked Celeste's case, reflected on the failures, looking at the timeline with hindsight. The red flags were everywhere. Obsessive contact, violation of legal orders, escalating behavior. We should have arrested him. We should have held him. We should have protected her more aggressively. But the system at the time didn't empower us to do that without clearer evidence of imminent violence. And by the time the violence came, she was already dead. Celeste's story is horrifyingly common. Across Australia and globally, women are killed by stalkers and domestic violence perpetrators despite having restraining orders. Despite reporting to police, despite doing everything they're told to do to stay safe. The legal and law enforcement systems remain reactive rather than proactive, responding to violence after it occurs rather than preventing it before it does. Celeste shouldn't be dead, her mother Aggie has said repeatedly at advocacy events. She was 23. She had her whole life ahead of her. And she was murdered because a man she worked with decided he was entitled to her and became enraged when she said no. That's what this comes down to: male entitlement to women's bodies and attention. And what happens when that entitlement is rejected? The bedroom window through which Sacco entered has become a symbol of the vulnerability stalking victims face. No matter how many locks they install, how many restraining orders they obtain, how many times they report violations, predators find ways to reach them. And too often, by the time the system responds with adequate protection, it's too late. Celeste's family has established a foundation in her name, providing support for stalking victims and funding advocacy for legal reforms. They've become reluctant experts in the gaps and failures of protective systems, speaking to lawmakers, police departments, and community organizations about what needs to change. "I don't want another mother to experience what I experienced," Aggie said at a rally for stalking law reform. "I don't want another family to find their daughter murdered in her own bedroom by someone she begged police to stop." Celeste's death has to mean something. It has to lead to change, or her suffering was for nothing. Luis Sacco remains imprisoned, serving his sentence. Celeste Mano is buried in a cemetery where her family visits regularly, leaving flowers and remembering the vibrant young woman whose life was stolen by a man who couldn't accept rejection. The question that haunts Celeste's case isn't whether her killer was caught. He was. Quickly and with overwhelming evidence. The question is why she had to die at all. Why an intervention order wasn't enforced. Why police didn't arrest Sacco after the first violation, or the 5th, or the 10th. Why Celeste's fear and reports weren't taken seriously until after she was dead. These aren't hypothetical questions. They're the questions every stalking victim faces as they navigate systems that tell them to report, to document, to obtain legal protection, but then fail to actually protect them when those measures are violated. Celeste did everything right. She set boundaries. She reported harassment. She obtained legal protection. She documented violations. She asked for help repeatedly. And she was still murdered in her own bed by the man stalking her, while her family slept mere feet away. That reality is what victims' advocates are fighting to change. Because Celeste's story is not unique, it's one of two. Many similar cases where women are killed by stalkers despite seeking help. Despite legal protections, despite clear warning signs, her bedroom window, once a source of natural light and fresh air, became the entry point for a killer who'd been hunting her for months. That window represents every vulnerability in the systems, meant to protect stalking victims and the deadly consequences when those systems fail.